All right. Hi, everybody. This is the walkthrough video for Monday, May 5th. It's try 3, week 11. If it looks a little weird, it's because I'm trying a new way of recording these today. I know what page it is. Hang on a second. I don't know how to get out of here, though. Oh, see how clever that was going to be? I do know what page it is now. It is going to be page for Dr. Milks. It's going to be so exciting. It's page 45. Bell work that you will eventually pick up is page 45. All is well with the world. All right, try 3, week 11. Make sure your bell work is filled out all the way. Here's our next order of business. This is a picture of the migration that we can backtrack by looking at genetic diversity in humans, particularly mitochondrial DNA. So this is an example of another example of migration, right? We use that same word in biology to describe when animals change their permanent ranges, like their permanent homes and where they live. Sometimes it expands, sometimes it shifts, and that's what we're going to be looking at this week. All right, so our work for today is asking how does island biogeography impact us here in Indiana? Because we are nowhere near islands. Oh, yes, we're full screen. Thank you. We're nowhere near islands. It turns out this is a really important idea because the same ideas matter to ecosystems, even though we're landlocked to islands. So today I'm going to walk you through an assignment called Introducing the Theory of Island Biogeography. A reminder that there is no school tomorrow. There's a last call for missing or late work next Friday at 2:40 p.m. So let's go ahead and take a look at our table of contents page. That's better. I don't know what to do here, y'all. I thought this would be so awesome, and it was not. Hang on. There we go. Let's take a look at your new table of contents page. That is going to end up showing you 45 and 46 is today's page called Introducing the Theory of Island Biogeography. I'm just even going to make it Introducing Island Biogeography. Close enough. A lot of writing. So this word, sometimes called Anthropocene or Anthropocene is the short term for it, but it's called the Anthropocene. Um, this is like the epoch of history, and anthro here is a word that means humans, like anthropology, the study of human cultures. And so we're going to go back to thinking about these ideas we've created about biodiversity and protecting ecosystems, really specifically in what humans can do to help. So here's our game plan. Today we're going to do this introduction. On Tuesday, there's no school. And then I just wanted to show you the next 2 weeks is this big case study. It is built to be extremely doable by everybody who's taking biology class. You are going to have to bring your charged computer to school every day after today, and you're going to have to be able to make the things we're asking you to make on time. If you are absent, please, please, please watch the videos so you know what to do. Your goal for this project is a 3-minute presentation to small groups. You will not have to stand up in front of the whole class. That's going to be on Tuesday of finals week. And if you have done a class with me before, you know that we build these to be very doable. You will build it as we go. So today, though, we're going to fill out that assignment called Introducing the Theory of Island Biogeography. And I wanted to show you our goals for today. So the first order of business is that I have to learn how to click. So we're going to think about timescales from global to local and about physical scales, and then about timescales from millions of years to decades. We're going to be thinking about the factors that influence species diversity. You know some of those things from last try. We're not going to revisit them. We're going to think about what natural events and human activities can cause biodiversity to change. We're going to think about can we predict what will happen to biodiversity in the future. And along the way, you're going to think about the types of data, experiments, and methods that we use to study biodiversity changes. So, chapter 1, the theory of island biogeography. I have here for you 4 different islands. I'm going to take the dots away and I'm going to show you where they are again. So to help you think about it, this is the Indian Peninsula, this is the Philippines, and there are these 4 islands here. I'm going to show you some biodiversity data for them. This is bird species. This is plant species. That little swerve means approximately. And in case you're interested in jumping spiders, there's one quick piece of data. So that's one set of data, and I've got it reproduced for you very small right here. And then I'm going to show you another piece of data. These islands are all roughly the same size. I think this is the third one we're supposed to circle. I don't think that's where the circle is. The circle ended up over here, but it's supposed to be over here. So just bear with me. The number of bird species, the number of plant species, the number of springtails, which is a type of flightless insect. So again, all these islands are roughly the same size. Again, that's replicated down here on your paper. And what I'm going to ask you to think about is, do you see consistent patterns when you look at these numbers for this picture? And then do you see consistent patterns when you look at numbers for that picture? If you do, what hypotheses can you articulate as to why these patterns exist? This is what this means is, can you come up with an explanation? So let me show you one more time what the data looks like for this island set. You can pause the video if you need to take a look and answer your worksheet. Yeah, it has something to do with island size, doesn't it? You can think about that. And then this one, they're all the same size of island, but they're different amounts from shore, right? So that'll be your answers for those two. Now, when we think about habitat size and species richness, we can think about this idea that larger islands may hold more species, presumably because they're easier to find, like that bird floating around in our example about the trees in the Caribbean. And they also let you have bigger population sizes. So if something happens, you don't the population is so big that not everybody dies in your species, right? And then a word means proximity, more about that in a moment, but habitat proximity and species richness. There's this other conclusion that islands that are closer to the mainland, if the mainland has a lot of biodiversity, the islands closer hold more species, presumably because they're like easier to find, right? I wanted to say this idea, I don't know why I doubled it here, this idea about richness and proximity. Richness means high biodiversity, and proximity means closeness. So hopefully that'll help you. Observations like these led to the development of the theory of island biogeography, which aims to predict species richness or biodiversity in a given part of the world. So here's a graph to give you an idea, and we're going to walk through it here. I do want to show you it's reproduced down here, but don't draw anything yet. You'll get to that point. So here's the probability that newly arriving individual is a new species, right? And if there aren't many species present, if a new one shows up, it's the first of its kind, right? So that's going to be very high. And over time, if there are lots of species present, if a new organism shows up, like that bird ending up on a new to it island, or lizard rather, ending up on a new to it island, um, probably already similar type of that more of that same type of species there, right? Now, the other axis, this is a graph that has two axes. The blue matches the blue, but the red over here, what's the probability that an existing species goes extinct? Well, if there are a lot of numbers of species present and they're all competing, pretty high, right? But if there aren't a lot of species and that's the only lizard that's eating insects in that part of the ecosystem, then it's probably going to stick around, right? Probabilities look like this. Now, that cross where they cross over is how we're able to think about species richness for any given island. It's in quotes here because, as you'll find out, it applies to where we live too, right? So you can imagine we could like make things, we could make something, a graph that looks like this and ask you, can you draw the line for distance to mainland? What would happen to if the land were nearer to a mainland? And what would happen if the island were larger? So that's what I'm going to ask you to do on the paper. I'll give you a hint. It's going to look like that. Cool. Go ahead and pause and make yours look like mine. All right, and then flip the page because right now, this is a hypothesis that's based just on correlations. So what we're going to think about together is how would you test this hypothesis with an experiment? This idea that richness, species richness, goes up when it's nearer to the mainland, and it goes up when islands are larger. The intersection of this line will go bigger. There will be more species present. So how would they test it? What experiment would you have to run? If it makes you feel better as you're thinking about this, this experiment would not be done now. But what would you change? What would you measure? What would you have to keep the same? So go ahead and write some notes. There are not any right or wrong answers. Write IV colon DV colon CV colon and think about what would you have to do to make this experiment happen. Pause the video. All right, well, it turns out some people did, and they published The Theory of Island Biogeography in 1967, and they did an experiment we'd never do now. Do you remember how there are those little islands in parts of the world? They took an island and they put it in scaffolding, and then they killed all of the animals, all of the insects, all of the lizards, all of the birds. They just killed everything. And then they looked to see how species richness, not plant species richness, but other biodiversity of animals came back. And it turns out they did come back. And the results kind of are difficult to see in the graph that they published. So here's like an updated, simplified version, right? The number of species before they took the animals off, especially, yeah, they're talking about arthropod species, so species richness. This is how many there were with distance from the mainland. So this is a very closest to mainland. This is far away from the mainland. And it turns out that although species richness doesn't always get to where it was before in these experiments, which went on for several years, you can see that the one that was farthest from the mainland did end up being the least rich afterwards. So, like, people have done experiments like this. We would never fumigate an island now, but we have, and it turns out that this holds true. So, take a pause and write down how the scientists tested their experiment. You have to think about what kinds of things they would have had to control. Hint, it's island size. And then you have to write a summary of what their experiment showed. You might say, when like when, and you'd have to write down what the independent variable was. In this case, when you increase distance from the mainland, what happened to the dependent variable? If this is tricky, please come to Panther Plus and see me or check in with a friend. All right, now the next part is chapter 2, details matter, the last 2 million years. You're just going to take a couple bullet notes. When you find this sentence, you're going to fill it in. Okay, so my friend Armin goes to America, and this is what he looks like when he is 18. He has all this hair. Nobody in his family has ever been to college. And by the time he comes to the United States, he studied bugs, and he's a big insect nerd. He now works here in Bloomington, and he like looks for insects and trees, and he thinks he knows a lot of names of trees. And it turns out that there are big differences in different parts of the world about plant species richness. So, for example, this is some information about where he grew up in Europe and in Eastern North America in the temperate forest where we live. As you can see, there's a big difference, right? And so, like, why might that be? There was an answer that people gave for a long, long time that had to do with, as you'll see, some geography. And although it's probably not true for where we are, it's definitely true for like Europe and Asia. Let me show you how we know what plants used to live where we are in the past. This work is happening up back behind the IU golf course off the bypass, actually. So when trees and plants make pollen, the pollen falls into lakes and ponds, and then it settles. And when it settles, we can actually dig it up with these big cores. So these are people, they're like basically taking a big straw and they're drilling it down into the bottom of ponds or places that had ponds that are evaporated in the short term. And they pull up these very mucky looking things, and they can be very, very long in distance. And that thing that we're looking at here is, hang on a second, my alarm is ringing, but I'm nearly done. What we're looking at here is some pond mud, but it's also got all of these different pollen species in it. And what you can do if you know what you're looking for is that you can actually find very different looking pollens from very different species in those sets. So it doesn't take a lot of training. I've had students who have gone on to do this for their undergrad research with a professor who's now retired, but you too can look through pond cores and you can find these different types of pollen. And so that's how we know what plants used to live in the recent past. We don't need fossils of them. We can find their pollen. Their pollen is very long-lived. And it turns out that if we look at pollen analysis, like for example, in an Eastern European country, Romania, it turns out that the plants all start there. And then as time goes on, they become less and less common. And there's this question about why they went extinct. And there's this story that it turns out is probably not correct in this analysis, but it's about mountain ranges. So you can imagine that it might be more difficult to migrate up and down as the weather gets warmer or colder as climate changes. Turns out there's some like contradictory things that are happening for this example, but you can make the same argument about Europe and Asia, which are connected. They're like all one land, right? And there's some mountain ranges hints there. So what I really wanted to give you, even if the idea we're showing here, it shows up in textbooks all the time, it's probably not correct. But what is correct, and this is on your worksheet, is that species richness observed now is also a reflection of like the communities, not communities of people, but communities of different species, their ability to respond to major changes in the past, like ice ages, right? So as the ice sheets came down, you'd end up with colder places. And when the ice sheets went away, you'd end up with warmer places. And so like that is actually shaped by geography, which is an important thing for you to think about when you're making your solutions later this week. But here's that sentence. Species richness observed now is also a reflection of communities' abilities to respond to major perturbations or changes in the present. I'm going to fly through the last 200 years and the future. I'm just going to ask you some questions about how land coverage has changed in our state over the last 200 years, because we're living at the end of those last 200 years. So here's the story. Yes, we got it. Oh yeah, Armin wants you to know that like he's not much older than me, and what we know about climate change has changed pretty dramatically. And we now have a better picture than ever of this idea that there are some really serious warming patterns and cooling patterns, but we're making the climate change faster than anything we've ever had record for. So cool. The last 200 years and the future. So before European colonists showed up in Indiana, 87% of Indiana was covered in forest, and the upper, like northwestern area was like flat grasslands in the beginning of prairie. But everything you see here in green was forest, and we live like down here. So to get a feel what this might have been like, if you've ever been to Brown County State Park and like looked at the lookouts, it looked like that. All of Indiana looked like that. We know that there were some indigenous people who were caretaking lands, forming pathways, building settlements, but the vast majority of our land was treaty forest, right? That changed pretty dramatically. And in 1900, less than 9% of our state was covered in forests. Today, it's 23%. And the reason that happened is because during the Great Depression, in the New Deal, people came and planted trees. They also did things like build Cascades Park, if you've ever been there. There are still some old growth forests in Indiana, but most of the forests that we think about were replanted. They are less than 120 years old. Here's a graph that kind of shows that, and then the replanting. But you know, in 2001, which is the most recent picture I have, but it hasn't changed that much, a lot of our state is used for agriculture. Now, kind of just a little bit lower from where we live are some forests and some places that are harder to farm. But even in Bloomington, we have a lot of land that's agricultural. I'm not going to tell you that farmers shouldn't farm. What I am going to tell you is that we have to think about how to do that in a way that helps preserve biodiversity, because corn pollen blows around in the wind, but like soybeans and vegetables, they get pollinated by insects. And this arrangement, as you'll find out, is going to be really difficult for our insect friends. So somebody made a website where they are looking at climate predictions if we don't stop putting the same amount of greenhouse gases into the air. And for example, in 60 years, we think the climate of Bloomington is going to feel like the climate of Oklahoma. That's nearly Texas, way, way, way warmer. Winters are expected to be 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. They're expected to be over 15% wetter. That's a big change for winters where we live. And it's really going to impact the plants and animals that are here. So for plants and animals that are here, if we take a look at what the expected climate are, this prediction is a little older, but you can see like basically that migration is going to be up maybe even higher into the mitten of Michigan. So to maintain the current climate niche, Bloomington organisms would have to migrate. And we're not talking about back and forth like birds. We're talking about changing their range about 250 miles north within 60 years. That's about 4 miles a year. That doesn't mean that one little beetle is going to put on a backpack and start walking with like a soundtrack behind him. But it does mean that over time, the organisms that are down here who rely on certain features of our climate will not be able to do as well and will not survive and reproduce. But the ones up here might. And then as it gets warmer from climate change and warmer from climate change, even if we work to curb greenhouse emissions, it's still very likely this will happen, then the ones that are down here, as it gets warmer, these might get too warm, or their food sources might be too warm, or there won't be a good timing with them. They're less able to survive and reproduce, and these are better able to survive and reproduce. And so that's how you get range changes, even of trees, right? Like trees can't walk, but Joshua Tree National Forest in California. There are very, very few Joshua trees left because the ones that have lived that far south are less well able to survive and reproduce. And so there are fewer of them, and there are more to the north of that park. So, our last order of business for today is going to be thinking about the ability of three different insects who live in Bloomington to migrate and change their range. So the ability to migrate to new range and the success of that migration depends on many factors. And so I'm going to show you a fact sheet in a minute about these three insects. And you're going to think about, okay, do these insects, like this one, does it have any pluses that you think will be able to help it migrate? Here's a hint. Armin is holding it by its wings, right? Are there any minuses? You'll see those in the fact sheet. And you're going to take some notes on page 3 for each of these. So this is a ground beetle. It requires forest cover to survive. So it can't, sidewalks are no good. Farmland is no good. Ditches are no good. It needs to be in the forest. It's a predator on caterpillars, snails, and little soil arthropods. It doesn't fly. There's one set of babies a year, and the adults may live up to 4 years. This is a mining bee. It's solitary, but they do nest in sandy soils together. They forage on sunflowers and related plants. Those only flower at certain times, and climate is changing some of those. There's one set of babies per year, but the adults are active only in the early spring. Last but not least, we have this darning needle, the lance-tipped darner. It looks like a dragonfly. It's called a darner. They can eat all kinds of things. They have a broad prey spectrum, kind of like coyotes were opportunists. Lance-tipped darners can eat a lot of different things. In order for their nymphs to grow, they grow underwater and they actually need pretty good water quality. They're awesome flyers in adults, and they also make one set of babies per year. So think about what you see here as like positives and negatives of being able to make the migration we were just talking about. They live here in Griffey. So to help you think about, this is a very low quality image, but to help you think about where we are, our school is down here. Here's where it says Bloomington. Here is Indiana University. And then this is the Toyota dealership to the south of us. And then up here is Griffey Lake, if you remember being there. So what we're going to do is predict migration success of these guys, and you're going to fill out that fact sheet. So here's that for you. Pause it and take some notes. All right, that ends our work for today. I want you to go back to that sentence that we filled in, and I want you to fill it in again one more time. I've made some changes. And to make it so it's a little bit easier to write. All right, that's it for me. No school Tuesday. See you Wednesday. Have a good one.